Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. We're seeing the biggest protests in Romania since the fall of communism. This over a decree that loosens anti-corruption laws. These are images from the central square there in Bucharest. With us from Bucharest is Sebastian Burduja, founding president at PACT, the new Civic Action Party. We're also in the company of a member of parliament for the ruling PSD, Andrei. Welcome back as well. Here in the studio to Alexandru, Herlea, former Romanian Minister for European Integration, president of the cultural association La Maison Roumaine, the Romanian house. Andreea Dumitrașcu, member of the association the Café des Roumains, and joining us as well from Bucharest is Sorin Ioniţă, who is with the Expert Forum think tank. The trade minister announcing his resignation over this decree. The president, who hails from the opposition, among those who says he's taking the case to court.
Regarding the emergency decree, I've decided to file a challenge with the Constitutional Court. It is, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the Presidency's legal advisors, obviously a legal constitutional conflict between the government and the judicial system and the Parliament.
Sistemul de justiție și Parlament în cealaltă parte.
All right, and February the 7th will be the date when the Supreme Court will rule on all of this. Just days after the European Union put out a report praising progress in Romania, we got this joint statement on Wednesday from the embassies of Belgium, Canada, France, Germany, the Netherlands, and the United States, blasting the decree as a setback. Shirley Sitbon has more.
After joining the EU in 2007, Romania was pressed to put an end to mass corruption among its politicians. 6 years later, Romania's Prime Minister assured Chancellor Angela Merkel his government was fighting graft intensely.
I want to express the determination of the government and the government coalition to have and to strengthen a constitutional state in Romania, to fight corruption and to create the best possible legislative conditions for investors.
But later, the same Prime Minister Ponta was tried for forgery, money laundering and tax evasion. He was Romania's first Prime Minister to be sued while in office. But Ponta was far from being Romania's only corrupt politician. The country's anti-corruption directorate has prosecuted former leaders and ministers, 1,170 people overall accused of abuse in office, including the current head of the ruling Social Democrats. Romania has made progress, but still ranks 57th on the Transparency International report, pulling Europe's average rate down with a handful of other countries. Scandals have been revealed not only among top politicians, but also local ones who have often exchanged state-funded contracts or handed out authorizations for bribes. These illegal practices have led to tragedies, like when a nightclub burned down in 2015, killing 64 people. Authorities had authorized the club to open, although it was clearly dangerous. The executive order issued by the government would keep those who commit corruption and power abuse crimes out of prison unless those involved take more than 44,000 euros. That's more than twice the amount an average Romanian worker earns in a whole year. That's why Romanians are protesting again, and why this time their number is higher than ever in the past 2 decades.
Sorin Ioniţă, when you think back to when there was that tragedy at that nightclub in December of 2015, at the time, what were you expecting to change?
First, a change in the government, because obviously there were people responsible in the central and local government for not implementing regulations, and that actually happened. So it was, the only positive effect of a very unfortunate event. What didn't happen, unfortunately, is that, we have again the same party in power who was in power back then, following the same pattern, actually, of trying to overrule protests, to ignore protests from society, and to abuse the rule of law, because this is what is really concerning. We don't feel there is a real restraint that everyone should have in a democracy. Even if you win big time. You have a government, you have majority in the parliament, you can do anything you want, but you don't, actually. You impose yourself some restrictions. You don't pass emergency ordinances to pardon yourself, for example, from a criminal case. Or this happens very, very seldom, actually, in a normal democracy, and people penalize that. And when people are dissatisfied in such big numbers, you expect the government would engage a dialogue and would become, a little bit more yielding, which did not happen. Actually, what we saw today after the ruling party, meeting of the leaders, we saw an escalation of the problem, and we saw the government and the lady who was a minister of interior, she started to make blacklist of people who called people out in the street on Facebook. I mean, this is not what you expect in a EU member country.
Andrei Pop, what's the way now to tone this down? I mean, the government is going to have to back down, isn't it? With when you see how many people have turned out.
Of course, the government interfered with the speech and more transparent actions of the Minister of Justice, Mr. Sorin Ioniţă. But basically, the topic that we are talking about is that this law entered into effect, or it's a possible law that is pardoning some leaders of our party. I would like from the leaders or the person that are now in the studio are participating in the debate to present to me and to all our viewers, article by article, how it has a correspondent into the convicted effect of our leader, to see, okay, is this the law, or we are just talking about just conceptually of our party, the Social Democrat Party, of always being corrupt, always, let's say, accusing that it's a party that is just promoting corruption, which from my point of view, of course, as member, it's a false theme. And also, I would like to ask Mr. Sorin Ioniţă to tell me why or what was the progress from 2015 to 2016 when the Social Democrat government has fallen and the professional government led by Mr. Dacian Cioloș. What did they do against corruption, and what were the progress of the fight against corruption during the last 10 years? Because we are talking about the last 10 years of the aggressive fight against corruption. And I would like to
let's pick up. Let's pick up on that point, because just let me pick up on that point, because I want to bring in Alexandru. Herlea. You were a minister who negotiated Romania's entry.
No, I didn't negotiate. I made what I could to open the negotiations.
To open negotiations. So, I stand corrected.
When the negotiations were opened, I left.
And there were stringent requirements for being in the EU. There were doubts over whether or not Romania and Bulgaria were ready.
Well, because of this, Romania and Bulgaria were in Europe 3 years later than the other 10 candidate countries.
So
and because of this, you spoke just before of the report of the European Commission dealing with the verification of the functioning of justice and the fight against corruption.
And it was a mostly positive report.
Well, may I tell you, I have some small experience. It's a very diplomatic way in which the Commission is presenting the report.
Okay.
So you have always a kind of abstract, a resume at the beginning with 9 words. And if we are looking at the details, you have a long list of things which are in a bad state. So the report of the Commission, you have to take it and to read it, carefully. And this is why, in fact, this MCV, this mechanism of control and verification, stated some weeks ago that, in fact, Romania has to keep this mechanism because Romania is not yet able to be a country without this verification system.
Not yet ready to be without this verification system. Sebastian Burduja, we were talking about how it goes beyond just one single party earlier. When you hear what the European Commission said, and there was in that report warning against, by the way, passing this decree, when you hear the way the European Commission is saying, look, Romania still needs to be under watch. At this point in time, again, how deeply does this run beyond what's going on in the high halls of power, at the local level, in your daily life? What is it like?
It is very deep. But, you know, you run into it in hospitals, in some schools. Politicization is another huge issue. It's inescapable. And the other thing that's inescapable is the huge fortune amassed by people who have worked only in the public sector. And many of the leaders of really different parties, not just the Social Democratic Party, but including the leader of the Social Democratic Party, are very wealthy. And they cannot possibly justify those fortunes. On the EU's pressure mechanisms, I am very much in favor of keeping them. And if you actually go back and track the development of the anti-corruption system in Romania, you will see that the Anti-Corruption Department, the National Integrity Agency, the General Directorate for Anti-Corruption, and the Ministry of Interior, they all owe their existence and to some extent their consolidation to very direct external pressures from the EU. And even this particular mechanism, which was basically invented for Romania and Bulgaria, it had no precedence in the EU practice before this, is needed even today. It has no teeth. There are no sanctions, direct sanctions that go along with the mechanism for cooperation and verification. But it does create public pressure. It does allow civil society groups, regular citizens, opposition parties to say, we're not on the right track. We need to be very careful about continuing the fight against corruption. And I was very happy to see that the report had already reflected the somewhat unfortunate abusive use of these emergency ordinances, or the intention to use emergency ordinances to seriously curtail anti-corruption legislation. And just one last point here, no serious legal expert will argue in favor of these changes. It is not a matter of gray, you know, it's black or white. You look at every single article, Article 297, point number 1, and you see clearly that the punishment for misuse of power is significantly reduced. It is completely forgiven under this arbitrary threshold of 200,000 lei that nobody can explain. And the other problem is that by reducing the sentences down from 2 to 7 years, down to 6 months to 3 years, you also reduce the prescription, right? So basically there are cases that if they're not opened and solved in a shorter amount of time, it's gone. They're out, and they will continue to be corrupt, to amass these great fortunes, and to govern really arrogantly without any kinds of ties to the regular people.
Andreea Dumitrașcu, you're living right now in a country where there's a growing number of voices saying that the EU is part of the problem, not the solution. Here, we're kind of hearing the opposite.
Well, actually, my generation and I think many other people before us do believe in the EU, because it was the EU and the fact that we wanted to be part of the international alliances like the NATO or the EU. It is for that we have made progress, because we had to keep up to the standards of other countries, Western countries towards which we looked forward or which we thought it was better, so we wanted to be better, we wanted to be like them. So there was public pressure to go into this direction, and we did. For many years we did. There were many politicians that maybe they did steal, but people usually agreed that, okay, they steal a little bit, but at least they are doing things. Then we grew up. Then we said, no, it's not okay. They do something and they steal on the other hand. We don't want them to steal.
Sorin, you're not...
Steal a little bit.
Yeah, that's another...
A lot.
Yeah.
Sorin Ioniţă, let me ask you, is this a generation gap issue?
It might be, not really. It's mostly a social gap between a more liberal, upward-looking people in the cities and probably some less developed parts of Romania, which are mainly rural and where people depend on the state for many, many things. So we have to understand the complexity of this electoral map. But it's not exactly a generation cleavage, actually, because if you go, I'm right here near Victoria Square where the protest is. And by the way, this is why my connection is weak, because people are streaming from their smartphones, actually. There are a lot of pensioners, actually, in the street and families with kids. And their pension and the minimum salary has just been increased by this government in January, actually, and the students' allowances were increased. But this doesn't stop people from protesting, because beyond that, they care about principles and they don't want to be lied, and they understand this thing that anti-corruption is important. So this is actually a protest for principles, not for material gains, and it's across the spectrum, I would say, at least in the big cities of Romania, but in an increasing number of them. The day before, we saw demonstrations in a very undeveloped country, which is called Teleorman, from where Mr. Dragnea, the leader of the Socialist Party, comes, and he rules that place with iron fist. And for the first time after the fall of communism in Romania, there were protests in the small town, actually, capital of that county, which is a sign that we have a civil society everywhere. So the main message from these events these days in Romania is that even if you gain a big vote, that does not defend the laws. So the laws are the laws. And the judiciary and the lively society fights back. You have your own right to rule, but you have to have limits for that. And the rule of law, you cannot trample over it.
Andrei Pop, the Constitutional Court will have the final word. What are your thoughts on that?
I would like to make once again a note about the limit of 200,000 lei. This was stipulated in the Constitutional Court decision number 405 from 2016 for this type of cases. And also, this limit does not mean that the liability is vanished. No. It will not be called abuse in office or abuse of service. It will be administrative liability. So I think we are interfering in false topics. But anyway, I would like to state once again that the Social Democrats salute the peaceful protest, and this means that civil society is strong, and I think this is really important into our evolution as democracy.
And what about the European Union? Are they a force for good in this case, in this context?
From far as I know, our Prime Minister, Mr. Sorin Ioniţă, already sent an official letter to all our esteemed leaders at the European level to explain much more and much better what the governmental ordinance contain and what their effect it will be.
So what's your reaction when you see the letters from those ambassadors to the Romanian government?
I don't have any reaction as a member of parliament, but we can analyze at the level of the group of our Social Democrat Party, and our action was to answer in order to inform there much more better, because it seems that were some lack of information that conducted to their, let's say, not very diplomatic reaction.
Alexander, Herlea, let me ask you just a bit about...
May I ask a question to Mr. Pop?
Go ahead.
To have his reaction. How can he explain in this case the fact that his colleagues resigned? I mean the Secretary of State, Daniel Șandru, and the Minister of Business and Trade, Mr. Gianu. Do he think that they were wrong?
From my understanding, their reaction, at least of Mr. Gianu, was to the lack of a reaction firmly and strongly to the protest, meaning that was some lacks of communication or transparency. Guilt that our Minister of Justice...
Absolutely wrong.
No. We can't accept such explanation. No,
this
kind of wooden language is unacceptable.
These are the alternative facts put forward by the Socialist Party in Romania. So this is just not true. Factually, it's not true. He said something else.
Exactly.
He said he cannot accept what is going on, so he disagrees with the laws, and then he cannot explain to his son, when the son grows up, such a shame. These were his words.
Exactly.
Andrei Pop?
I think we interfere in a political reaction where Mr. Gianu said clearly that his option is not that his statement will be used in such way, but I stipulate to analyze one more time what I said regarding the Constitutional Court and the, let's say, lack of information regarding the topics of who will be convicted and who will profit about the effects of the laws in these cases.
I'm sorry,
May I
but
say that the
that is
answer
also
of
not
Mr.
true.
Pop
That is also not true. The Constitutional Court said there should be a limit, but they didn't specify the limit. So this is not true what you said.
Look, I wanted just to emphasize, if you allow me.
Mr. Ioniţă, please let me state I was in contact with the Legislative Council today, yes? And
you don't need to. The Constitutional Court decision is written. We can read it, and what you said is not there.
So
it's not it. So you just lie now.
We're running short on time.
Let me check. Number 405 from 2016. Which in instance
Andrei Pop, we're running short on time. We're running short on time. I want to ask
you. Yes, but somebody accused me of lie, and I would like to state that it's not true. Okay?
All right, it's not true. Alexander, I just want a quick word on the broader context right now, the geopolitical context, because you have a new leader in neighboring Bulgaria who's more favorable to Moscow. We're seeing in Moldova a similar thing. We talked about a little bit earlier how there are many here in Western Europe who see who see the European Union as weaker. How's Romania faring at a time when the European Union seems weaker and Russia seems stronger?
Well, Romania was always speaking in a historical perspective, in a very difficult geopolitical system. And Romania today is really scared, I will say, because you don't know what can happen. As you emphasized, Russia is there, Putin is there, it's become stronger and stronger. The way in which he was able a little bit to deal in Syria compared with the capacity of the European Union to react, or more wider of the West to react, was really scaring. Everybody knows who Putin is, and I want, just because you spoke about the Romanian neighbors, that he will visit in a few days, maybe tomorrow, after tomorrow, Budapest, Hungary.
He's there this Thursday?
It's already, This can be a very interesting aspect.
Sebastian Burduja, as we see these protests head into a third night, your thoughts on where Romania is going?
Well, I believe with the protests themselves and the current situation, it's going to get worse before it gets better. The position of today of Mr. Dragnea and the Prime Minister was very defiant. They are not willing to reverse anything. In fact, it sounds like they're going to push even harder. There are rumors that they're planning to merge the anti-corruption department and the anti-terrorist department to get rid of the chiefs that these two organizations have. I think that the world needs to look at Romania right now. Europe needs to look at Romania right now. And we really need to admire these people who are taking to the streets. Again, not for monetary reasons. The economy is fairly strong still, although probably not for long if this keeps going, but simply for their dignity and for democracy and for the future of their children. And the fact that we are very pro-Europe here, pro-EU, is another good sign. And I think in the complicated region that we're in, we should be a beacon of hope.
Should be a beacon of hope.
I just hope.
We're going to have to leave it there, Sebastian Burduja, on that note of hope, as you put it. I want to thank as well Sorin Ioniţă, Andrei for being with us from Bucharest. I want to thank as well Alexandru, Herlea, and Andreea Dumitrașcu for being with us. Thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate.